YouTube on.
Okay.
Okay. So welcome to those folks who are joining us from YouTube. Welcome to those of you who are here with me in Zoom. It's great to have you with us. My name is Stephen Fetter, and I manage the United Learning Program for the General Counsel Office. And once again, it is my delight and privilege to welcome you into this webinar for church treasurers. We were saying as we gathered what an important leadership role this is within our congregations, and often an unsung one, but you allow us to do our mission, and you help us sort out the resources that are necessary so that God's work is done. And we are grateful, which is why we put the energy and time into planning out these events once a month to join you. And we are heartened and delighted to see how many of you are responding. So thanks for coming. I'm going to do my normal role tonight, which is to kind of curate the questions that come in on the chat. And once again, we're going to invite you to turn your microphones off and just communicate with us by chat. There are now 89 people, 91, it's growing by the second, joining us here. So if we open the mics, we'll only have time for a handful of questions. If you put your questions into the chat, then I'll do my best to group them together in obvious categories and throw them at the presenters as quickly as I can, and we'll get through as many as possible. And any of the questions we don't get to, I know Eric has been pretty good about following up with people afterwards. So we'll make sure that you have a chance to contribute and raise your concerns and hear what needs to be heard. We are focusing on the work of trustees tonight, which is related to the work of treasurers and also an important piece of the administration of pastoral charges. So thanks for joining us, and thank you to Eric and Clyde and Angelica who have put together our agenda. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Eric and invite you to take us away.
Thank you, Stephen. And as we always do, we're going to start. I like to show the creed, but we haven't been reading the creed. I just want to say that we are this collective group of folks who help with the finances of the church, trustees or treasurers. We're very much called to be church in this way. And it's a role that is getting tougher and tougher to fill. So it's so important, the work you do. I want to take a moment, though, as we do, for a land acknowledgement. And I want to stress that we're not doing this to tick a box or because it's increasingly common. We're doing this as a visible gesture of our commitments to a better way. So Clyde and I are in Toronto, and Angelica, and so is Steve, and Angelica south of Barrie a little bit, I think. But in Toronto, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. And this is why we do it. This recognition must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So I could finish one more line there and say, thanks be to God. With that, tonight, we've got some news, not a lot left. Most of the stuff is wound up, deadlines passed in terms of federal programs. Nothing too new on the provincial side that you might not be aware of already. But we do have a few bits of news that I'm getting enough questions on that I think are worth reporting back to you. And the focus tonight is a workshop that I used to do for trustees in person. 10 or 15 years ago, the church would literally pay me or pay someone like me to travel around and do these things in person. and folks who drive 2 hours through a snowstorm and dress up so they could attend, a few PowerPoint slides like this. And today you can wear whatever you want, and you can, put on a ball game right after this. So it's way better, in my opinion, or at least more respectful of your time. So the main focus is trustee stuff and common tensions that I've seen more often than I thought I would in being a trustee. I want to say too that Clyde and I, we're not sure if we've been demoted or promoted, but Clyde is a brand new trustee for about 2 weeks now for his own congregation. And I've been a trustee at my church for a number of years now. I'm the trustee treasurer. And so, we'll be speaking with, some firsthand experience for sure. Insurance, there's some key news on that front that I'll be reporting on. Angelica has some additional information on payroll, including, I'm going to throw a teaser because she negotiated it and deserves the credit for it. But we figure we've had enough work with ADP and trying to get additional access and trying to get our own bridge listing and all those things that Angelica has achieved. She also talked them into not applying a rate increase this year. So that's pretty awesome. Now, that's just kicking the can down the road, but right now we take everything we can get. So Angelica, congratulations on that. I have insurance news twice, so I clearly didn't edit this very well. Okay, and then just a little bit on some work Andy Spears is doing on the old credit card file. And we have suggested that this might be it for the spring. Steve, we were talking before we formally kicked off here, but we have gone through most of our topics now. And feel free to take the next few months to send in suggestions or things that aren't working for you. And we'll see if we can come up with some relevant programming for you in the fall. So just a reminder, there's one of the few things left. Some people have, called, wanting to rush to repay the COVID loan, the SEBA loans in particular, or the church loans, because they were originally due this year. In both cases, that deadline is extended. So if you need the cash flow, and there's a good chance you do, or you might, we've got that extra year interest-free, particularly in the case of the federal loan. Make sure, don't wait till December 20th or something. I would wrap that up in November, just to make sure there's a very clear audit trail and that you therefore qualify for that forgiveness that you've already accounted for. On the United Church loans, even if you have repaid but need cash flow assistance, we will reissue a loan, but we obviously won't give it a further credit on that. So in some cases, folks are even using that to help with the assessments that are still owing in some cases. Here's a decision that was just made a week or two ago. Well, there it goes, on April 30th, maybe a little longer. With the high price of gas, that's been a real hit to everybody, but in particular to folks who are needing to travel extensively. I'm thinking of smaller settings and multi-point charges and so on. So the mileage, the General Counsel official mileage reimbursement rate has been increased from 41 cents to 46 cents. This is 75% of the CRA maximum. They call it a reasonable allowance rate, but basically that means if you go any higher than their number, you get taxed. So that's something that for those of you who are paying for pulpit supply possibly, or have multi-point situations, or ministers who need to travel a fair bit, something to be aware of. This is effective from May 1 to September 30th. And if gas prices stay as high as they are, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see this extended through December. But right now it's May 1st to September 30th. And it applies to ministry formally it applies to ministry personnel in pastoral relationships, volunteers, and elected appointments, and folks who work with the General Counsel office. Frankly, that latter group, there isn't a lot of travel right now anyway, but for particularly for ministers who have to put some miles on a vehicle to get to a pulpit on Sunday, this is hopefully a bit of respite. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. There's lots of energy in different parts of the country around supporting Ukrainian, displaced Ukrainians. I'm not using the word refugees because they technically aren't refugees. And this creates some interesting challenges in that you can't, I'm not going to say you can't, but you technically shouldn't be doing tax receipting for monies directed towards Ukrainian displaced people support, because they don't qualify as refugees right now. And at a minimum, you should check. There are various provincial programs. I cite Manitoba here as an example. But the whole idea, if you've got a community group that says, let's do something, the best advice we have right now is don't run it through the church, because that takes it into allowable, your own charitable activity over which you have direction and control. And in both cases, you've probably failed both of those tests on a technical basis. Whether you'd ever get in trouble for this is a separate question, but it is the technical advice that I'm offering to people across the country right now. So switching to the trustee role. The trustee role is really unique in that, banks, all kinds of financial institutions across the country accept that this trust exists. Normally, there are complex trust agreements. If you've ever worked with a private trust or anything, there's a lot of lawyering, there's a lot of paperwork, and yet a congregation can just name some people and rely on a 2-page document that's part of the United Church of Canada Act, which in turn was created by an act of Parliament, our Canadian Parliament. That's all stuff that would never happen today, but it's an interesting anomaly. So the document, it's a 2-pager that describes trustee role is in something called the Trusts of Model Deed, but trustees are also obligated to follow legislation. Usually it's a public guardian and trustee or some name like that related to trustee activity. A key point that people ask, typically there's no personal liability for trustees, in that there's a direction of, like, the governing body, the board typically is providing direction on what is to be done. And there's also consent of the regional council required. So sometimes people are fearful of personal liability. It's not zero, but I'll talk about it a little bit. It really should be very rare. And I'll get into that a little bit when I cite parts of the manual. As with a treasurer, trustees keep track of certain things, or may. In my own church, for example, the trustees help fund property maintenance, but there's a separate property committee. Whereas in a lot of churches, the trustees actually look after the property in addition to holding title. Again, at my own church, insurance used to be looked after by the trustees until they forgot to pay the bill. So we flipped it over to, the trustees don't meet as often. And so we flipped it over to the operating side of the church, and the trustees need to verify that insurance is in place, but they've got someone else doing it, and that's just fine. And most often trustees are involved in, again, they hold title as beneficial owners on behalf of the congregation to investments, and may oversee investment managers or review that process as well. So now I don't know if maybe this has faded away over time, but at my own church and many others I've found, there's a tension where trustees and the church treasurer are sometimes at odds, or The treasurer needs some cash and the trustees are saying, go find it somewhere else and that kind of thing. That can't be. It does happen. I've seen it happen in my own church years and years ago. But the trustees typically have very much a focus on asset preservation, whether it's the building, whether it's the investments. But they also have to take any instruction from the official board. They don't get to actually disagree. However, I stress this, a trustee is typically a respected member of the congregation, and there's no reason there shouldn't be tension. If there's a legitimate disagreement or of views, a trustee can't say, no, we won't do that. But their choice is, if there's a lawful instruction, their choice is to resign. So it is working together that it needs to happen with the church treasurer. The church treasurer will typically need information from the trustees. They might need to draw investments when they need cash, whether they borrow or whether there's a draw from investments. The church treasurer has to pay the bills, right? So, many years ago when I was first treasurer, there were two solitudes, and the first thing I did was insist on a finance committee, so initially informally, but just that had the trustee, had the property chair, had the treasurer. So we were all working with the same information. So these are literally, articles from the manual of the United Church, which, as you know, is our governing document. Some congregations might have a constitution of their own, but typically the CRA, typically most congregations don't. And the manual is our governing document. So trustees are responsible for holding all congregational property as part of the United Church. And there are a couple of technical exceptions to that, but basically property is typically going to be held, as we've discussed before, in the name of the trustees of XYZ United Church. And trustees must give the same care and attention to congregational property as a reasonable person would give to their own property. Now, that's not a hugely high standard. That means that you want to make sure there's adequate insurance. You want to make sure that repairs might be made and so on. But it isn't as strict as a fiduciary duty would be. So another one is, and a key one here that I'm reminding people is, trustees must comply with all decisions about congregational property that are made by the governing body and the regional council. Now they sign the documents typically in a legal transaction, and they can certainly participate in a debate around the best way to do something, but they don't get to decide, and that's really important. The one exception to that might be situations where if a church is closing, the congregation may have wound up, but trustees are kept in place to handle, for example, the sale of the building or the transfer of the building to the region or whatever might happen. And the other element is, to the extent that there are United Church requirements and rules, trustees need to abide by those as well. Again, coming back to the liability question, because in this day and age, we all should worry about that. The trustee is not personally liable for any loss or damage to any congregation property unless it was caused by the trustee's own action, and that's more typically a physical action, intentional or negligent. So basically, you don't get a completely free pass for doing something you should know was wrong. But otherwise, there are solid protections for trustees, and on top of that, we have directors and officers insurance too. So unless something is willful, I think the trustee is going to be covered off pretty well. The church will step in to assist if there is an issue. So there's a handbook, a fairly current one. This website, Steve, if you want to paste that into the chat too or something, that would be fine. Otherwise, people can pick it up from the slides or even just Google it. But there's a pretty detailed handbook, including some checklists on how to handle various transactions. So I recommend that. It's also very good for treasurers to read, even to know, what kinds of things should be done. And sometimes you'll find that you're already the one doing this. Okay, so trustees in practice, typically but not always: property insurance, a building capital maintenance plan, long-term investments, if any. The one thing that's always is legal documents related to the property. So if there's a lease to be signed, for my congregation, I often end up being involved in that. If there's a sale transaction, if there's an offer, counter offer, all those kinds of things, it's typically trustees. And typically there's been a meeting that established whatever boundaries there might be around, hey, you can sign back for this, or you're authorized to go as high as this, that kind of stuff. Okay, act as stewards. Okay, so the trustees, the legal concept is act as beneficial owners on behalf of the United Church. They aren't a separate organization. They don't have a separate agenda. But if you do have, divisions, and again, there are enough that I'm commenting on it, it's important to recognize that trustees are often folks who have longstanding members, an important voice in the congregation. And therefore, you shouldn't be arguing on the basis of role. You should be deciding what the congregation has decided, and have your opportunity to provide input if you disagree, but then get to decision. A couple of special cases: cemeteries. There is typically a separate Cemeteries Act in every province. There's typically a separate board, although some churches, they're equivalent or they're mirror images of each other. So you need to be aware of which situation you have there for cemeteries. And we might even do a cemeteries webinar in the fall. I did appoint one of our staff people, CEO, at the national office, which of course is a role that doesn't exist. But Bev Og is known as our cemeteries executive officer, and has learned an incredible amount about that. Okay, closure and amalgamation. Again, there's motions that the trustees need to sign off, typically related to property and disposition of all assets. And when a charity closes, it needs to have transferred all its assets to another charity in some fashion, or spent it as part of charitable activity during the windup. If there's any money left on your balance sheet at the time the CRA revokes your number, they will come after you for 100% penalty tax. So if you listed a property on there, it could be anything, your bank accounts, you need to. Ideally, you should get a final T3010, that's the annual charitable return, and you should get that to zero. And there's a further form called a T2046, which again helps explain where any monies went after charitable status was given up. Again, most folks here have a live active congregation, but if you're closing, it's really like this stuff crops up a couple of years after the fact. And if your name was on it, the CRA will be chasing you for these collection amounts for a congregation that closed. And it's quite a mess. I'm working with treasurers in regions across the country tidying some of these up.
Eric, if I could make one additional comment on
Go
here.
ahead. Yeah.
And the closure, the thing that you have to watch is that you cannot give a gift back to the donor. Under the Charities Act, it has to be transferred to another charity. So if somebody donated, for instance, a brass cross for sitting on the communion table all the time, you can't give it back to the family of that donor because they're not a registered charity.
Yeah.
And we had a church in New Brunswick that got their wrist slapped over it. So
yeah, well, and you're actually supposed to the extent that it was something was transferred unconditionally to the church, and particularly if a tax receipt was granted, you're supposed to be at least try to realize market value. I mean, you're already, the argument is that charities are already getting a tax break, that if you have charitable assets, you should be trying to realize market value. So selling that kind of thing is a way to go. But you also have to be careful about selling church artifacts, because you don't necessarily want to see some of these things show up on eBay either, associated with your name. So it's a very delicate area. Thanks, Clyde. Okay, so this is something I mentioned last time and had probably about a half dozen of you say, uh-oh, and called me, and I sent you some recitals and some advice on how to try to fix this. But trustees ideally should not be named individually on property title. Imagine, like, if you theoretically, then you would need to go change it every time someone left, someone passed away. The whole idea is if you can have this generic title, then it's valid every time you have a legal transaction. You can just say, hey, these are our trustees. I can prove it. There's the motion from the annual meeting, and the bank accepts that readily. So do lawyers, so do financial institutions. Another thing to do, and this will come up again when we talk about insurance, is knowing what the insurance deal is. We do have churches out there that are insured for wreckage. That means if the church burned down, the insurance company pays to have the site cleared and nothing more. And that's something that some places have done if they've concluded that they'll never replace it. They're trying to save money. But you better not be, pardon my language, pissing off members of your congregation when they find out that you make this. A treasurer should never make that decision. A trustee should never make that decision alone. Whatever your insurance deal coverage is, it's a good idea, particularly if it's not full replacement cost, to make sure that the congregation knows and share this at an annual meeting. And we may have more on this if we go with the self-insurance program that I've been talking about. So again, as we always do, the trustee handbook we shared with you earlier, the congregational finance page. In BC, there's a whole section of BC laws. I haven't, this was drawn to my attention by a friend out in BC. There may be some of that in other provinces. BC is a little bit farther along in its documentation related to nonprofit organizations. And always regional council, either web resources or staff resources is a key, particularly for things that might vary across the country. So as a trustee treasurer myself, and Clyde is one now too, effective May 5th or whatever that date was. Again, thank you for taking it on. It shouldn't be a role that's as onerous as treasurer. In fact, in my experience, it just is not even close, but it is an important role. And again, you're often dealing with folks who have a deep appreciation for congregational history and context, whether it's special gifts like Clyde talked about. So as a trustee, again, your voice should be heard. It should be good debate, but you're offering it as a member of the congregation, not as a trustee. A trustee that, has very limited basis to just say, hey, I'm a trustee and therefore you must. So you're probably guessing, I'm hoping there's going to be a question slide there. Steve, have we had many questions show up yet?
We've had a few, and you've answered some of them along the way, which is good. One of the things people may not know is that ministers are trustees.
Right.
A lot of the ministers don't seem to know that, and we run into that in some of the trainings we do with ministers. But ministers have to be on the trustees. They don't have to chair it, although that seems to be the tradition in some congregations I've served. But ministers are trustees, which is interesting. So questions about whether they can hold other roles. Somebody's asking, can they be a member of the official board? Can they be the treasurer? Is it a conflict of interest to have different roles as well as trustee?
My answer to that, certainly within the church governance structure, is it isn't a conflict. You again have to do the best you can. A lot of our structures date back to when our governance structures were intentionally redundant. We had 30-person boards and we had 15-person trustees and stuff. You do what you need to do. It's perfectly okay to be a trustee and a treasurer. As I say, a trustee signs documents and acts as beneficial owner. The only thing I would say is make sure that you're when you are wearing multiple hats, it's always good to say which one you're wearing or think about which one you're wearing when you speak. I don't see any conflicts particularly. I also want to comment, if I could, on the minister being a trustee.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually against charity law,
Mm-hmm.
and charities can't do it. However, the United Church of Canada Act and the manual in particular, but the United Church of Canada Act provide for this, and they override the normal charity law. So what we answer, for example, on the T3010 is a minister isn't being paid to be a trustee or governor. They aren't being compensated for that. That just happens to be a role that the United Church of Canada has grandfathered in their history.
I think that's important because lots of ministers don't know that they're expected to be having that role and seem to be surprised, but lots of church boards don't seem to know that either. Trustees meetings are, I think I'm right in saying that ministers have to be there. They're part of quorum in the same way that they're a part of quorum in their official board, although they don't necessarily vote there.
Yeah, my understanding is not for quorum, but I could be wrong. I'm even happy to check that, Stephen. You might know the letter of the law better than I do. I can tell you that I haven't seen a minister consistently at a trustees meeting in any church I've been to.
Interesting. Okay, well, there you go. I felt it was my obligation to be there. So,
well, they're lucky to have you.
There we go. We'll talk later. How much should trustees be writing checks for expenses, says James? Should all expenses be run through the operating and finance committee and trustee funds only used if the main accounts run short? How do you tease apart those roles?
I'm going to ask Clyde to weigh in on that, but I'm a trustee treasurer, and as it happens, Clyde even keeps the books where I'm a trustee treasurer, and I haven't written a check in years. I like the idea of again, simplicity in accounting. Clyde?
I prefer to see all the expenses go through the operating account, and then the trustees are handling large sums. If you get to a point where your operating account is running low, you ask or request through the board for a $10,000 amount from the trustees funds, not for $1.50 expense. So putting all the expenses through the operating account makes a lot more sense, and it keeps things neater.
A church I served where the congregation had investments, the trustees managed those, and the treasurer managed the operating budget. And Jane is pointing out that Eric said something similar on an earlier slide where trustees are in charge of long-term investments. Is that a helpful connection?
Well, again, the investment oversight should mean periodic contact with your investment managers, reviewing the financial, reviewing the returns and the risk profile, and if you have an investment policy. Yes, those are very typical trustee duties. And again, as a trustee chair, I do that, or a trustee treasurer, I do that. And then in our case, when the church treasurer needs some cash, he sends me an email and I cash in some investments. And I'm the author, two signatures and all that, but I'm authorized to request investments to be cashed in so that they can send cash over to the treasurer.
Okay. So a couple of questions here. One is public, one's come to me privately. Here's a question about bequests. What should you do if a bequest was given 60 years ago, but its purpose was never written down properly? And there's just this general sense about what it's allowed to be used for, and the family's long gone. What do you do? Can this be rolled into general funds, or would you stick with what was passed down verbally?
Verbally is an interesting question. Certainly, if it was written down, the surest thing, if a purpose for a bequest is frustrated. My favorite is if somebody leaves money to the organ fund of the church, but there is no organ now, and they've had a piano for the last 20 years. The technically correct answer is to go to court for a clarification if a purpose is frustrated. But in that particular example, you're taking some risk by saying, hey, that was intended for the music program of the church, and we can fund piano maintenance from it or something like that. But if there isn't a written record, there's a little less risk around rolling something into general funds. However, if you've had it restricted for years, the other argument is that there must have been a reason for it at some point. Clyde, anything on that?
I would tend to agree with you, Eric, and it's very hard to get the courts to approve any change in what's written down, but they also look at what have you been doing with it for all these years, and that will lead to what the court would rule is the way it has to be handled.
Yeah,
I think also it's okay to separate these special cases with designated donations and bequests. A bequest is going to come through a will. And as a recipient of a bequest, as a charitable recipient of a bequest, we have to keep a copy of that will on our files forever. So there has to be a written record somewhere. Or we have been required to keep a written record of a bequest, but not of a designated donation.
Yeah, and it's I don't even know what the law is. If something is verbal, then you even get into verbal by who, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a specific case, feel free to send me particulars, and I'm not going to opine on it myself. I tend to err on the side of overly practical solutions. But I could bounce it off counsel.
Okay, thank you. Another question which has come to me privately. We don't own a building, says this treasurer, but we do own other physical assets. Most of our assets were donated or funds were raised for them, but we don't carry them on our books. So if we were to disband, do I understand that we can't give back those donated items to the donors?
Certainly not. If they were donated and receipted, then there's no question. No, you can't. If they were donated, like a donation is still to a charity, is still a unconditional gift, unless there was something written down. Like if somebody said, "I'm lending you this," unless the church closes or something, that's different. But generally, if it's given to the church, it's given unconditionally, even if there isn't a tax receipt, and it's part of church assets. So, my advice there would be, if there's any intent at all or concern about this kind of stuff, get it in writing.
Nothing damages relationships more than fuzzy instructions.
Yep.
Okay, James is saying our trustees, this is a question I think about investment policy and procedures. our trustees like to have GIC interest come back through their bank account, and then they write a new check to the investment company, I guess, to buy a new GIC. Is there anything wrong with just having the GICs being rolled over within the investment company rather than cashing out every maturity?
Well, again, and you're someone who hasn't written a check in years. I like the idea of rolling over and just accounting for the interest myself. Clyde, and
I go with the simplest way of doing things, and the GIC rollover is a lot simpler.
now that being said, we have people who, like to see physical, tangible things, and it's a little more work. It's even costs money to write a check and get it approved these days, but it's not a crime. It's just a more traditional way of doing things.
Those are the questions I've seen about trustees, Eric. There was one question from early on in the beginning when you were talking about Ukraine. And I tried to talk about it in the chat, but maybe you should too. You were telling us to be cautious about supporting Ukrainians who have come to Canada. But Laurie writes, United Church has been doing this campaign, this national emergency relief campaign about Ukraine. Should we just sort of send all of our dollars there then? How do you tease apart the caution you offered with this national campaign?
Yeah, let me just say that I want to be very clear. All kinds of places are supporting Ukraine. My own congregation is, I am personally, but the issue is accepting money on a tax receipted basis. If somebody wants to donate to a Ukrainian relief on a tax receipted basis, they could donate to the United Church campaign. They could donate to any number of other, there's some Ukrainian charities that are specifically charged with this, or they can, even the Red Cross. But the point I was trying to make is, if you were looking to, let's say you were looking to house a family or help a family settle in and pay some of their rent and help them get started and that kind of thing that we normally associate with refugee programs. I was just saying that is not a formal refugee, or in most cases is not at present. So this could get fixed, but I'm just flagging it as a risk, that's all.
Okay. Well, once I said there were no more trustee questions, several more came in. So let me just throw you, this is from Ivan at YouTube. Do most churches have separate trustee bank accounts?
Is it a question?
Yes. Is that how churches handle it? Do most churches do that?
It should, any number of bank accounts should be based on what's useful to you. My own church has a separate trustee bank account. The only transactions are a credit of 8 cents a month interest. But certainly if you were writing checks, it's, that way you could have a separate bank account. As Clyde said earlier, having, payments go through one account is a very clean way to do it. But, it's often an extra cost. My own, as I say, I have a dormant bank account for my trustees.
Okay. So you kind of rolled off right at the top, this idea of trustees holding the ownership. Say a little more about that. James says, can you talk a little more about the concept of the ownership of the local church and how the trustees relate? In context there, for years, people in our church, he says, insisted the Central United Church of Canada was the direct owner of our old Methodist building.
First of all, you need to say what it says on title. It could say on title that you're still a Methodist church, which would be an administrative correction. But trustees under the United Church of Canada act as beneficial owners. So if you are making a decision to sell a major renovation, a major lease, all those transactions, the authorizing local party is the trustees, period. So they're acting as beneficial owners, and of course there's a regional approval as well. So it is on behalf of the United Church, but they sign the paperwork. I don't sign, if you're doing a local lease or if you're selling your building, you know, I don't see that stuff as national CFO.
So is there a minimum number of trustees that a congregation has to have?
You know what? I wouldn't have known the answer to that until just yesterday, but the answer is 3 and the maximum is 15. And I think if you have 15, you're crazy.
So what about a congregation that doesn't have any?
The manual provides for how to work around that. I think there's some mention of board chair or whatever, but check it's just a few pages. It's 2 or 3 pages in the manual, the 2021 manual online, and it specifically talks about exactly how you can move up from 3.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to me that there's a procedure too for if all the trustees happen to be dead.
There are, again, I wasn't going to use that joke tonight, but it's remarkable how many places we have where the trustees, at least on title, if not on the church books themselves, are deceased.
Yeah, no, it's happened for sure, because the trustees don't meet very often. All of a sudden you come into a renovation and realize everybody was elected 35 years ago and they're all gone.
Yeah.
When you're listing your assets on the 23rd and T3010, do you include the church land and building?
Clyde,
Yes.
good. I would have said the same thing.
You're
Now
supposed-
the interesting part is at what value, you know, you technically you're supposed to put things on at cost, but most people won't even have that information. So I've actually told people to put market value, not replacement value, not insurance replacement value, but market value, because if you sold it, you know, the asset would disappear, would move from being, you know, a building on your balance sheet to being cash, and there'd be no, you know, it'd be the same asset value.
Mm-hmm. Judy
What-
is reminding
What
us.
I've done and
Go ahead.
what I've done in that situation is, if they haven't been recording it, the first time that I'm working with them, we record and I pick up the value that's listed in the statistics until they get an evaluation. And then we put the evaluated fund amount on the forms.
So Judy is reminding us that there's a role for the regional council as well as the trustees in sales and renovations.
Oh, absolutely. I think I've tried to say that a number of times, but any property transaction, other than minor renovations, but certainly a sale or a significant lease, a lease is an encumbrance of the property. These require, most regions now have a property commission or a committee that would review these things monthly.
And certainly in the regional council that I belong to, that commission takes motions from the trustees, not from the official board. They want a motion from the trustees requesting permission to do the renovation or do the sale or the encumbrance or whatever. So the trustees, that has been the occasion for calling trustees meetings in my congregation, because regional council wanted the motion from the trustees meeting.
Again, the trustees are the legal owner. So you know, it's splitting hairs, but the congregation board isn't the legal owner. So that's why the region is requiring the trustee motion.
So if you need a property evaluation, where do you get it, says Mary Beth?
From a sale, there's 2 different kinds of evaluations, right? But let's talk about for insurance purposes. You go to these specialists who talk about how much it would cost to replace your building. So that's a replacement cost valuation. But what you just asked about is a market value. And what I've typically done is try to get one from a local real estate agent, often a member of the community of the congregation, for free. Basically, you're just saying, hey, this is a special purpose building, so it's not the same as a house. What, you know, it has this much land, or what might it sell for? And that gives you at least an approximation.
And you'll get a better value from it if you're dealing with a commercial real estate agent.
Mhm.
In large markets, there's often real estate agents who work only on churches.
Yeah,
There are
specialty
some.
buildings. Yeah.
That's all the
Okay.
questions I've seen, Eric.
Okay, well, we'll keep going. We've got a couple of more things to cover. We talked about gift policy last time, and the whole idea of having one so that there aren't misunderstandings about a gift. We asked earlier, hey, I gave it to you, now I'd like to get it back because the church is closing or whatever. It's better to have this kind of stuff written down. Many of you last time wrote, not many, but probably about a dozen wrote to say, do you have an example? And I didn't have a church example of a good gift policy. So I went to Mr. Google and so the David Suzuki Foundation has a really good, thorough gift policy. And the whole idea is to have a clear understanding of intentions so that if something happens, like the church closes and I want that candlestick back or whatever the other examples, that you have something to respond to. But the main idea of a gift policy is, do I accept the gift at all? In other words, can I use it for charitable purpose or sell it to generate revenue for my church? What happens if I raise not enough money and the intent that I was going for, I can't fulfill? What happens if I raise too much? That kind of thing. And while we're at it, let me just come back to that. Another one that trustees should have is a bequest policy. Like, where does the money go? My church, if it's less than $5,000 on a bequest, it goes to operations. If it's $5,000 or more, it goes to the trust. We view that as a legacy gift that goes into our quasi endowment or goes into our long-term investments. So that's what we do at my church. So because it is T3010 season, if there's anyone out there who hasn't filed theirs already, do not wait till late June. The courier will get lost or something bad will happen. So very much file if you haven't already. Clyde has added one point to this slide. If you are filing online and uploading the various forms and so on, it needs to be uploaded in one file. So your entire T3010 paperwork bunch, the T1235, the T1236, the financial statements and so on, all need to be in one file. Clyde, did I get that right? You're muted, sir.
Yeah, yes, it is right. We had one church write me about it because they were having trouble getting the files to upload. And that was one of the suggestions I made for them. I hadn't experienced it myself. And he came back very quickly and said it worked.
Well, there you are. And I've had to upload a number of files recently, just, where people are checking to see your charitable gifts and stuff. And it seems to work really well. But this slide is only in here because it's late May. And June 30th is the deadline. And again, if you haven't done it, get on it. Okay, a couple of the usual things that we've got. The Church Hub. I'm trying to, there we go. Church Hub, if you haven't submitted your 2021 statistics now, please do. Again, your assessments due dates, the original due date was February 1st, and May payments are now past due if you're on quarterly. Again, we're hoping that over time, everyone will get on a pre-authorized method so that you don't have to do any work on it, and we don't. It's just an efficiency measure that we encourage. Appreciate, though, that in some cases, maybe that's a tight cash flow angle for you. But the statistics this year are probably, to me anyway, more important than ever, because I'm trying to get a handle on what the overall church experience has been in the second year of COVID. We know what happened in 2020. This helps us in planning and resourcing the whole church, frankly. Again, there's just a reminder of how you go into the assessment file to get your reports. This is a repeat slide, so I'm not going to speak to it, but it is part of the deck. And if anyone's still out there struggling with that, they can also send an email to assessments@united-church.ca. So one of the things we're asking people to do is upload. The admin user at Church Hub has the ability to upload content, and in particular, we're hoping that everyone will upload their annual reports. Now, if we do that, we're able to eventually get, some regions require annual reports as part of their submission. Some I don't think don't. But ideally, we'd like to get all this electronic and all be in one place. So we've got some instructions here on how to get into the tab and upload your report. But if you're still stuck, statistics@unitedchurch.ca is the inimitable Susan Jackson, who will problem solve with you and make sure that gets done. Again, just the web links repeat on how things work. And if you're not online already, please consider it. Had a few questions still about the governance extensions. I don't believe they'll be extended past June 30th. But several people asked this week about getting a budget approved and so on. We've had these temporary rules in place now since April 2020, and they expire June 30 in terms of annual budget approvals and pastoral relations type appointments. Most folks have probably passed this stage, but it's till June 30th, we still have that dispensation. Okay, this is a news item, and cyber insurance. You recall last April we bought a policy and paid for it nationally, and to have a degree of cyber risk insurance for all congregations. It did its job. There were 3 claims this year, related to ransomware. There was a $2,500 deductible. But the bad news is the insurer looked at the risk profile of our congregations in terms of the kinds of local safeguards and stuff. And this is happening in the cyber risk space, is not willing to provide the insurance on an umbrella basis. So 2 things. 1, we're pursuing this with other companies. And 2, if we can't get that, we'll be coming back to you and saying that you can get it individually and be individually underwritten and describe, what safeguards you have. A dead minimum these days, you have to have off-site backup and automated, and ideally you have even multi-factor authentication, although lots of our places don't have that. So right now, the current policy has been extended 3 months from April to July, and I am pursuing some form of replacement for this, but I'm telling you, it's going to be very tough to get in the current insurance environment. Okay, on the other insurance, this whole business of self-insurance, we have a proposal going to General Counsel, and if approved in July, we would be launching our own, it's called self-insurance, or sometimes it's called a captive. Very common in institutions, very common in companies, very common in charities, actually. But if it is approved by General Counsel, we'll be targeting premium reductions starting in December with the existing policyholders that renew. And if you're coming in from another company in December or later, you should expect to see premium discounts as well. Remember, all of this is conditional on our continuing to do good risk management and having good claims experience, because all these rate increases were not due claims experience. They were due to the insurance sector just seeking to raise its rates all over the place. So if you between now and December, there will be folks out there that might have a UCC Protect, but if you're somewhere else and you have a June renewal, we're saying don't even request a quote in June or September unless you have a current appraisal, because that's just one of the things. We've just done a lot of underwriting. We have to have that kind of information in order to qualify you for the discounted program. If you're with the UCC Protect program, there'll be a 15% increase if you're a June renewal or September, but you'll get that back and a further 15% in December. So again, to say the insurance space is very, very fluid right now. And we're hoping that as long as our claims history is what it's been for the last 10 years, that by having our own self-insurance, we'll be able to reduce premiums for all of our congregations. And on the credit card side, we haven't, we talked about this and we're kind of excited in sort of a January, February timeframe. And you might recall Andy Spears, a very dedicated church treasurer at Bloor Street United in Toronto, is running with an outfit of what's called a fintech, a financial company, carry.ca. They're loving it, and it's going to be it's a great service. But right now, Carry is only offering it to folks who maintain a pretty large bank account. So, and that's defined as $35,000. That's a lot bigger than many places. However, if you are in that boat, Andy's looking at having a briefing webinar for folks like that and can help get people onboarded. And meanwhile, he and I are trying to chase the same firm down to have this kind of offering available to everybody. So I touched on a few different topics there. Before I turn it over to Angelica, Steve, any questions on that? I'm sure there are on the insurance file.
There may be, but none of them is, nobody's writing yet. So
okay.
You must have been incredibly clear.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, okay. No, there's some chatter back and forth, but people are answering each other. So I don't think there's any reason to pause this.
Okay, well, we'll keep going. Angelica.
Okay, hello everyone.
Sorry for stealing your thunder earlier on the announcement, but
that's okay.
It was because of your tough negotiating.
Tough negotiating on a Friday afternoon. So just 3 updates from ADP. One Eric has mentioned already. No fee increase in 2022. Yahoo, great. I think we all can be happy about that bit of extra leeway, given all of the hustles that ADP has made us go through. The other piece is, as you know, ADP has now a designated email address, which is up and running, is working really well. Have heard good stuff, the turnaround time on it. If you want immediate response related to a payroll pay, so in other words, if your pay is going in tomorrow and something is coming up immediately that you need change, so make sure you put that on the subject line. Make sure you put urgent, pay related, your ADP code, and the name of your church. So, and someone will get to you immediately. Also, the General Counsel payroll team has now access to all of the reports. So that was pretty helpful. I hope they're going to be able to provide you with much more faster service and help you troubleshoot any issues that you may have related to payroll. A few other updates, as Eric has mentioned already about the mileage rate, 46 cents. The salary schedule related to ministers, That is not coming in until October. It will not be posted until September, late September, early October. As you can appreciate the economic conditions, we're still looking at what kind of increment for 2023. Just a reminder about statutory summer holidays, and keeping in mind, the employees need to get paid on time, so you need to reach out to ADP if the pay needs to be moved. ADP fees, again, that's a repeat, so we'll move into the next slide.
Yeah, and Angelica, just on the holidays and stuff, I think you told me that any new people going on to ADP, we're not even offering the real right at the end of the month dates and problem dates that arise from statutory holidays. We had all that fuss last year on September 30th, right? So aren't we trying to move people back to sort of a payday in like the 26th or 7th?
Yeah, ADP and I were working together to see if we can move some pastoral charges in order for the pay doesn't get affected, because the benefit file, your benefit premiums and so forth, get affected when an employee starts towards the end of the month or the beginning of the month is a bit problematic. So if we were to change the pay date earlier, say to the 25th or to the 26th, it will be much more easier. But we're still in discussions with ADP. We want to make sure it doesn't have a financial impact on the pastoral charges.
Thank you. And your next slide.
Team pay, just a few tips and reminders. Again, the bridge is there for anyone who wants any further training, or if you don't have the ability to access, please give us a call. We will help you access the bridge in order for you to obtain any of the training that you require. There's training guides, there's videos related to payroll tasks. So please reach out to the UCC team. The other piece that you need to also be mindful about is updating your ADP contact list. It is important that you have the current name and contact information of the treasurer. If you don't know how to do this, please contact us again, or you can send an email directly to ADP, putting on the subject line, update of contact treasurer. Next slide. This is a reminder, which we have seen quite a few cases where incorrect information has been inputted at the beginning of the year. So this is for ministry personnel increases that related to the cost of living on January 1st. It must be done on January 1st and not on February or March. You have to make sure and check the increment category, also known as the eligible service, as everybody knows. Your cost of living group, you must check to see if it's in the right group. We've had scenarios where they're in the incorrect group, so we've had to make adjustments. And when you're making adjustments, that it has an implication on your premiums, your benefits, and pension premiums. So please double check always. The FM fields on team pay, as you enter information on your payroll fields, you have to ensure that you enter the correct information, 1, and 2, you don't leave any spaces anywhere. So for example, as you enter in the field of female and male, it only allows for an F to be put in, but quite often spaces are put in, and that then provides an error on the file when we receive it in the benefit file. So very, very important that you don't write the female or male, you just put it F or M, no spaces at all. Again, if you have any challenges entering information, ADP service team, if you call them, please avoid calling them on Monday and Tuesdays at lunchtime. They're very busy, high peak hours. So the best time is to call early in the morning or late in the afternoon. Remember, ADP is 24 hours service, so they have people working all over the world. So you're able to call them anytime in the afternoon and the evening. And again, use the email, which is a much faster service than the phone. And you're no longer waiting an hour on the phone. Oh, so Eric touched a little bit about the importance of policies, and employment policies are the same. We have human resources policies online, and we've put in the website link, but there's also policies from Image Canada you can access and look at. There's sample policies. And if you have any questions related to what are the most important policies to have in place for your church, please give me a call. I will be more than happy to assist you. Policies can be very complicated, and they can also be very easy to do, not too difficult to put in place, but very crucial in your day-to-day operations, specifically employment policies. Again, this is actually the welcome page of Bridge. It has been custom made for us, for the United Church of Canada, and it's very easy to find. You'll find the email address as well as the phone number that you can call directly. Once again, any questions, comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to call me. My name is there, Pastoral Charge Payroll at United. Anything related to payroll, we would be more than happy to assist you. I think that we have gone through a huge hump with ADP, and I think that things will be looking much better as we added a new member to the UCC payroll team as well to provide you better service.
Yeah, and Angelica, we've been thanking your team periodically, but now having your team have that information as opposed to talking with a treasurer and then having the treasurer go back to an ADP phone queue and stuff, we're hoping this will be a huge upgrade, and we've all learned a lot as we go.
Most definitely. Thank you.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Okay.
Unless there's any questions.
I do have a few questions that come up. You mentioned something about a treasurer's name in emails to ADP, but what if the treasurer is not the ADP contact?
If you're not the contact, then ADP will not be able to assist you. And if you need to put your name on it, then we need to find a process for you to get on that list.
Okay, so when you're writing an email to ADP, you need to write it from the ADP contact, not necessarily with the treasurer's name, but with the ADP contact's name. And that's the one you need to keep up to date, right?
That's right.
Thank you. You said you had a box for F or M. What about non-binary employees? Asks somebody.
The system doesn't have that as of yet.
Okay, thank you. You talked about lunch hour, but what time zone and what hours?
Eastern. So that's a good question.
That's lunch hour in Eastern time zone. And
Eastern time zone. Eastern time zone.
Yeah.
So and that's basically what, 12 to 1?
12 to 1. Yeah. 12 to 1, 12 to 2. I would avoid that period of time.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. And finally, for ADP, if I add a new admin online, do I still need to send in a completed designated contact authorization form?
Yes.
Okay. Finally, a bigger policy question. These cost of living groups that were sort of created some time ago, is there any discussion about changing it to based on current housing prices?
Eric?
Yeah, I'm not close to this other than to say that COVID knocked us down back a year. I think the plan was originally to have that reviewed last year, and I believe there's a review underway, and I think even some compensation consultant work involved just to see if we can come up with a way that works better than what we have today, particularly with the rapid and potentially fluctuating house price. So that work is I think scheduled to be completed this year.
That's right, through the summer. So hopefully we'll have something by September or October.
Okay, thank you. Those are the questions I've seen. Thanks. Okay.
Well, folks, we're in the home stretch. There's your usual contacts. And now we've covered sort of, the past few months, trustees, new treasurers, T3010, GST, HST, and of course, all the government stuff. So what we're going to work on next will depend a little bit on you. Keep those questions coming in over the summer. Any suggestions? I think we will have a session. I'm talking to the regional executive ministers to have more information about changes and restructures, amalgamations and closures and so on. But that's a specialty area. So what we'll want to do is have a webinar that you can go look up on an education database when you need it. That's not one to sit, like, why sit in on that if you're not likely to need it in the next 20 years type thing. So anyway, there's your contact information. There's our traditional thank you for your time and generosity. And again, if there are any questions, further questions, keep those cards and letters coming, and have a great summer. Hopefully some relaxation away from how crazy the treasurer job has been these last 2 years.
Mhm. So I think that draws us to a close tonight. There's a couple of extra questions that have just floated in on the chat, but I think they're specific to a specific situation. So I would encourage you, as you're drinking your gin and tonic on the patio this summer, to think about where are the issues as church treasurer. What do you need to know more about? Or if you were going to hand this on to somebody else after your 30-year stint, what would the next person need to know? Eric is looking for useful program ideas for the fall, and we'd be glad to include those with his gin and tonic when the time comes. So meanwhile, thank you to the whole team, to Angelica and to Clyde and to Eric for being with us month after month after month, and working with us as we moved through the pandemic, and then helping us, reminding us that there is a normal here and that we don't have to be living in emergency mode all the time. Well, we're looking forward to taking a few months off, and we will look forward to seeing you again in the fall. So blessings to you, and blessings on your ministry and your work as you move through the next few months.
Blessings all. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.